Apathy, fear, discontent, cynicism, withdrawal. These are the very intended symptoms of authoritarianism. These are the goals of authoritarian movements. This is what authoritarians know. Their abuse of power, their overreach will produce in the masses, and that will create the vacuum for authoritarians to take power and keep it. And very, very unfortunately, we are seeing these sentiments start to infect our society as the shock and awe campaign of the first 4 months of the Trump regime has produced these very intended effects. So what is the antidote to these designs of authoritarianism? It's network building. It's the development of new ideas, the restoration of civic spirit and community. It's locking arms across our different issue silos to fight for a better future. And, I think one thing that we are grappling with in this moment is how can we start to make those activities, that spirit, infectious in the face of all that is happening in this country. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Midas Touch Legal AF. My name is Alex Aronson, Executive Director of Court Accountability Action. I'm so thrilled to be joined today by a tremendously inspiring young woman, Maina Vaidya, the Executive Director, the leader of a nonprofit that she started while in high school. She's still in high school. Maina, thank you so much for joining us. Begins with Us, an extraordinary project that I think really sets a shining example for this type of engagement. I want to hear so much about what brought you to start Begins with Us, what kind of work you're doing there. But, from what I understand, from what you've shared in our previous conversations, it was sort of like looking around at everything happening in the world and really wanting to see young people in your communities, start to engage more seriously and more actively to be part of the solution as the world starts to confront us with these challenges. Thank you for joining us here. Tell us about yourself and about Begins with Us.
Yeah, Alex, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure. Begins with Us came from the political climate at the time. So I started this nonprofit in June of 2022 following the Dobbs decision. And I call that my political spark moment. The Dobbs decision, I remember where I was to the minute on that day. I was in a classroom. I was at a summer program. And I think I was one of the youngest girls there. I was 14, about to start high school, interested in politics, but didn't quite yet know what I was passionate about. And I remember the Dobbs decision came out. We were in this classroom. I was seated between two 18-year-old girls, and the news alert went off on their phones. And I remember watching their faces as they read it, and then the room kind of went silent, or something in the air shifted. And some of the girls around me started crying or turning to each other and whispering. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand it, but I felt the tension in the room, the emotion. And that is when I started kind of habitually and religiously watching the news and getting more involved and realizing that everything that is going on, it might seem far removed because we can't vote yet. I'm 17 turning 18 this summer and I still can't vote yet, but all of these issues have a direct impact on our lives. No matter the age we are, no matter the color of our skin, our civil liberties are in jeopardy right now. And it is so important as we are moving into coming elections, turning 18, being the next voting population. It's so important that young women feel empowered, informed, and educated enough to make decisions that affect not just them, but something I said, and I very much believe, is that, we are not just voting for ourselves. We are voting for our mothers and our daughters and our sisters and our neighbors. So kind of keeping that in mind, and that's really the spirit of Begins with Us.
That's incredible. And it's funny because so many people look at a challenge like this, the challenge of engaging and finding structure through which to organize their communities, their peers, to see the type of change they want to start manifesting in the world. It's really hard to just pick up the responsibility of undertaking something like this. I just started an organization 2 years ago. I can't tell you what a challenge it was and how much of my own kind of reluctance to take the leap in doing that was born of the disempowerment that I think the scale of the challenges and systems we are trying to change creates. It's like, what can you do as one person, with your own ideas and your own networks and desires for the world? What can you do about that? But you did it. What did that entail? How did you decide to take that feeling and say, no, we're going to do something with this. We're going to organize. I'm going to build something real to start moving in this direction around engaging young women in particular.
Yeah. So being 14 and about to go into high school, I hate the feeling of seeing everything going on around me and sitting still. Like that feels wrong to me. If I feel something, I watch it on the news, I read about it. Inaction is probably the most frustrating thing to me, especially when all of these topics and issues are affecting me and the people that I love in my life. So the nonprofit has kind of three parts. We have a blog section, we have a podcast section, and then we have ongoing research that's going on right now. So the blog is really kind of where this whole idea started. My immediate reaction to hearing everything on the news was write about it. I love the humanities, I love history, I love English, and so that was kind of a therapeutic way for me to share my own ideas. But also simultaneously, everything kind of felt a little bit depressing, hearing the Dobbs decision and feeling the girls around me, and I was looking for media that I couldn't find in the mainstream. So I was looking for women empowerment stories as well, because at a time when it feels like women were under constant attack and still are, I was looking for stories that show the strength in numbers, the strength in the advocacy of the work of multiple leaders who have been fighting for, abortion rights or the ERA or whatever it may be. And so that's where the blog came out of, was me searching for these stories and then just writing about them. And then as our followership picked up a little bit, moving into podcasts and saying, I have a bunch of questions about these topics that I'm passionate about. I'm sure the girls around me do, and I've talked to a lot of my friends about this as well. So how can we turn that into a dialogue, kind of a two-way street, talking to these advocates, lawyers, activists, congressmen? How can we talk to them and have them hear what Gen Z is passionate about, and how can they tell us what they need from us so that we can mobilize, we can support, and we can get out where we need to?
Oh, amazing. All right. I have so many questions. Tell us more about the podcast. How has that gone? This is also new for us here. We've been doing this about 6 months with Midas Touch Legal AF. It's been so cool to get to have these conversations and build a community around a network of movement leaders and thought leaders that are engaged in these questions. Who have you had on the podcast? What are those kind of pressing concerns from Gen Z, and how have you been able to make those connections? I'd love to hear some examples.
A lot of it is cold emailing and seeing what sticks, which was a little bit out of my comfort zone in the beginning, but getting more comfortable doing that. The issues that are most important, or have been at the forefront of my mind at least, obviously reproductive rights, reproductive justice, but then also climate change and immigration has been a really big one. As we had our high school graduation at our school for our seniors last week, sending all my friends off to these lovely places to start college, to, engage on this new academic journey. But that's not all college is, right? College is, I'm assuming, meeting new people, new perspectives, testing yourself and pushing your own boundaries. And a lot of that comes from the people you're surrounded with. And so I've been thinking a lot about, as US-China relations grow more tense, a lot of these student visas being canceled. And I think a lot of these seniors who are leaving and getting ready to embark on this next stage of their journey are genuinely worried about what their college experience will be like, and if they are going to get everything that they deserve out of it, and if these international students are going to see their hard work pay off as well. And so that's something that I think has been definitely at the forefront of my minds, and I know a lot of the young women that I've spoken to in this generation in general. So translating those issues to talking about the podcast, I was very privileged to get to speak with Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy a couple of days ago, actually, and go into his office. And we discussed some of that and the pressing issues, and he's going into his Senate campaign in Illinois as well. So talking about, student loan forgiveness, that sort of thing. Again, climate change is another big one. I've also had the privilege of speaking with Jeffrey Rosen, who is from the National Constitution Center, talking to Fred Gutenberg about advocating for, he's advocating against gun violence. And there are so many different pressing issues. And the one thing that kind of streamlines all of this is that all of the people I've spoken to have a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration, seeing our generation and how mobilized we are, especially, this past campaign in 2024, got to interview Kaya Jones, who worked on the Harris campaign. And she really sees young people being mobilized, involved, ready to go. But it's just about making sure we have this information that, we're not getting our news just from like TikTok scrolling, but we're getting it from informed sites who know what they're doing and can then send us out.
Amazing. I have so many follow-up questions, but one I want to ask about is I want to press on this question of sort of news consumption among your generation, whether your peers, folks that you've encountered in your work, whether they have an appetite for news, whether because I think some of what we're seeing is a lot of young kids just sort of wanting to check out too as things get so ugly and polarized and partisan. Folks understandably are like, oh, well, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And then you've also got this digital media ecosystem where misinformation, disinformation find their way into digital platforms that kids are using, TikTok and other places like that. But at the same time, you've got a new strain of independent media voices, places like the Midas Touch network, that are breaking through a lot of the real problems in traditional legacy journalism where the stories aren't getting told properly. So how do you make heads or tails? How are the youngs, as it were, like making heads or tails of what is going on in the world, and how do we tell cohesive stories that resonate in their lives?
Yeah, I think that's one reason podcasts have become so popular. You can play them wherever you are. You can pause them. You can, rewind and do all of that. And I think, especially for our generation, I mean, our attention span is like this long. We're the scroll generation. Like, we need everything right here in front of us. So I think podcasts are a great way to, it's like being part of the conversation a little bit, which I think is helpful. And I think another thing that's kind of concerning, as you were talking about, all the different ways that people consume media and, the spread of misinformation, is I've seen, even in my conversations at school with friends, there's this culture sort of like these YouTubers or TikTokers, and it's primarily targeted towards young men. And that's a whole separate thing that I've been thinking a lot about, is kind of, I feel like young men in general have felt disenfranchised from the Democratic Party, especially this past election. But talking about how we can kind of capture that audience again. And I think even focusing even more on the issues that are important to us. So I've seen a lot of the debates that I've had, at school or with friends and in conversation, is what is important to us. Some people say that, making money, the economy, those are the things that are the most important to us. Other people, protecting our civil liberties, taking more of like a human rights stance, caring about bodily autonomy and that sort of thing. And so I think the important thing is reframing what we actually care about, and being able to have those conversations is another massive part of that. Like, we need to be able to sit down, have a conversation. We don't have to agree about everything, but at the end of the day, we can still be friends. We can still talk it through. And I think returning back to that core feeling of, first and foremost, we are humans. We are not defined solely by our political stances. That's a big part of our lives, that can be, but we can disagree, we can talk, but then we can share a meal after and we can still be friends. And so I think returning to that and keeping that in mind while we're consuming all of this distracted and confusing media is something that I've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah. One other question. All the issues you've mentioned, I don't have to list them all, but all of them, underlying them, are big constitutional questions at stake in cases before the Supreme Court. You mentioned that you started this work in the aftermath of the Dobbs opinion, a huge watershed, and for many, traumatic constitutional moment in our recent history. One of the ways we look at the way that things have gone in the courts is that the interests that have understood the power of the courts and funded a long game to really shape the law in their direction, seeking outcomes from these courts, have done so knowing that the law of the Constitution, the language of the Constitution, the doctrines that these judges are using to advance these agendas are out of reach for many Americans, probably for young people in particular. But court reform and the Constitution are a deeply central part of the work you're doing. I know you've done independent study on constitutional history and law. And that reform, you've been working with a friend of mine, Carolyn Fredrickson, the longtime president of the American Constitution Society. You're grappling with these questions. How do you find that experience trying to translate and connect the issues that your friends care about to the kind of big structural constitutional questions at the root of a lot of them?
Yeah, I think the main goal of Begins With Us is to take these topics that are heavy and they're serious and they're difficult and break them down into chunks.
Yeah.
Our entire purpose, I think, is to just make everything digestible and to make these podcasts really seem like a conversation, right? Not a lecture, not kind of like a teacher student, but more of a discussion and a free forum where, we can bounce ideas off of each other. And I think that's one thing that I've learned from these podcasts in particular is that nobody really has the answer, which is a very scary thing to say and to admit, but
a little liberating too, right? Because it's like your ideas are
exactly. But it's nice a little bit in that we're shared in our path of trying to figure out where we go from here. So I think bonding over that has been one thing that's, I think, brought me closer, I feel like, to my podcast guests at least. But being able to take these topics and say, give it to me in colloquial terms. What's going on? Why does this matter? How does this affect us? I think that's something I ask every guest probably, no matter their topic, is what's going on? Why should we care? Because I think also, as we were talking about, our Gen Z's attention spans being this big, is you gotta give it to them and you gotta show them why it matters. And so I think having it kind of at the forefront of our mind is like, this is not something that we can ignore anymore. We are almost at voting age. We are right there. We are next. We are the next ones up to bat. And so making that urgency feel really relevant and kind of at the forefront of their minds has been our goal at Begins With Us.
That's so great. And then you also mentioned research work. Tell us about your research lane, what kind of research you're doing, how it fits into all this, where you want to take that.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Professor Fredrickson, one of my favorite people, we got to talk a lot about court reform. And I also grew interested in FDR's court packing plan. So as President Biden's commission came out and that whole, world became a discussion, I had a lot of questions about, my first reaction was like, is this ethical? Is this proper? Is there precedent? Where have we seen this before? What was the public's reaction? And that's when I started diving into FDR's court packing plan a lot. And our main goal is to connect women's issues at the time to women's issues now. So looking at how women viewed court packing back then. So if you look at the 1930s, we're coming out of the women getting the right to vote. The ERA is being talked about, but not really a thing. Still isn't really, unfortunately. And then comparing that to now when, we have the Dobbs decision, which was a massive, overhaul, and we're experiencing less freedoms than our mothers and our grandmothers before us, which is shocking. So trying to make a link between that and seeing how that history is affecting court packing and how that's viewed today. And then also tying that a little bit into, again, the why we should care. Why did women then care? What are the issues they're facing? I mean, we're still talking about the ERA 100 years later. So kind of pressing into that urgency a little bit more and trying to motivate this generation that I know is there and ready, but really showing them, what are the next steps and what do we need to tackle moving forward.
Incredible. Can't wait to see that. Would love to stay in touch about it. Sounds incredibly important. And can't agree more that the historical analogs and precedents are just so important and valuable for us to be exploring now, right? I think there's no way that we can figure out a strategy. You mentioned earlier, nobody really knows what to do. There's no way that we can come up with a real, tangible, actionable, implementable plan to get out of here without a really good, solid understanding of how we got here. And that's going to take some real self-reflection and some real study of history. So thank you for undertaking that. Well, Maina, it's been really a wonderful pleasure to have you on. How can folks, I think folks here are going to be really jazzed to meet you through this conversation and eager to learn more about Begins With Us, support your work, get subscribed to your podcast. How can folks find your work?
Yes. My first message is please, please, please reach out. I love hearing from everyone, especially young people looking to get involved. We have our website, beginswithus.org. We are on YouTube, Spotify. We have a presence on X. We post whenever we have a podcast. I think I have an email on the website, so please don't hesitate at all to reach out. stay tuned for podcasts, for blogs, if there are any ideas or anything that, your audience would love to hear about and have specific pressing questions they would like asked. I would love to mention those in podcasts. And then the research effort as well, hoping to really push that forward this summer. And I think as important as the topic is, one of the most important parts about that research and that paper is the lens, which it's, through is the lens of a young woman. And I never think that you can have enough perspective from young women. Maybe my dad would disagree right now, but I think that is something that the market needs, and our generation in particular is craving, is a fresh young voice. And I would love to hear from everyone.
Maina, thank you for being that fresh young voice. It's incredibly amazing what you've put together and the way you're approaching this moment. It's really just something else. And I'm really grateful for your taking the time to join us today, for all the work you're doing. Would love to stay in touch and have you back. Until next time, folks, check out Maina's work. If you have a kid kind of like trying to figure out what to do with their summer, kicking around, share the website, make sure, get them involved. Like we need more. We need more people more actively involved and engaged, having these conversations, building out our networks, getting local, and locking arms for the future of our country. So until next time, stay mad, stay motivated, stay mighty. Signing off.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.